When you're reading the Bible, try to get the whole picture. Now, we'll use a couple of well-known Bible accounts to illustrate. Have you been raised in a step family or a blended family? If you have, did you know that you have something in common with Joseph, the son of Jacob? Joseph was raised with 10 half-brothers in a large blended family. So, now you want to try to view this family as a composite. You want to try to figure out, how did people mesh, or how did they clash within this family? What would you do? Well, you might start by writing down some of the characteristics of the individual members of the family. What about Joseph's half-brothers and Joseph himself? What do you know about them? What about Judah, Simeon, Levi, Dan, Naphtali? What do you know? So write down their characteristics and try to figure out how they might get along. Sometimes there is one individual incident that's recorded in the Bible, but we mustn't forget, people's actions have a way of affecting other people. So when you read about a certain incident in the Bible, try to imagine who might have been affected by that incident. Take an example. In the book of Genesis, we read that Jacob's son Reuben committed sexual immorality with Bilhah. Well, that had an effect on other people, without doubt. Who was Reuben? He was Leah's oldest son. Who was Bilhah? Rachel's handmaiden. Do you think that there might have been a little animosity or tension between Leah and Rachel sometimes, especially when you consider how their marriages started out? There may have been. And it may be that the attitudes of the women had some bearing on the attitudes of their sons as well. So you take all of these things into consideration. Now, Bilhah had 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. How do you think they felt when they learned that their oldest brother or half-brother had committed fornication with their mother? So there could have been tension there. And this all goes into the mix when we're considering the family as a composite. Now, do you picture Joseph at age 17 with 10 much older half-brothers, maybe in their 30s, some old enough to be his father? Not true. The truth is that there was only a 7-year age difference between Joseph's oldest brother, Reuben, and Joseph himself. In fact, 11 of Jacob's sons were born during the 7-year period when Jacob was working for Laban. 11 sons in 7 years? How is that possible? Easy, when you remember that Jacob had 2 wives and 2 concubines, or secondary wives. So there didn't have to be a 9-month interval between the birth of the children. In fact, some could have been born just about at the same time. They could have been the same age. So when Joseph was sold into slavery at age 17, his oldest brother was no more than 24. Some of his brothers were only a year or 2 older than Joseph himself. So we're talking about a group of young men in their late teens and early 20s. And this might explain some of the hot-headed reactions that some of those young men had. Well, so much for the boys. What about their father, Jacob? What can we learn about him? A lot. For one thing, he was a spiritual man. Now, this is something for you young brothers and sisters who are contemplating marriage to think about. Jacob was willing to go to any length to keep his relationship with Jehovah intact. Let's take an example. Genesis chapter 29 and verse 18. You can follow along on the screen as I read this. And we're talking about marriage here. Genesis 29:18, it says, Jacob had fallen in love with Rachel, so he said, I am willing to serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. Now, what's the takeaway? Jacob didn't marry the first person who came along, maybe some pagan woman. He didn't say, well, 7 years is too long to wait. I'm going to find some Philistine woman and I'll marry her. He was willing to wait so that he could marry someone who would join him in the worship of Jehovah. And you young folks, if you are willing to wait, you can be sure that you will have Jehovah's blessing as well. Now, Jacob was apparently also a bit of a romantic. Notice verse 20. It says, and Jacob served 7 years for Rachel. But notice this, but in his eyes, they were like just a few days because of his love for her. Now, isn't that poetic? Jacob may have learned to treasure his wife by observing his parents, Isaac and Rebekah. It appears that they had a strong marriage. Just notice what we read at Genesis 26 and verse 8. Genesis chapter 26 and verse 8. It says, after some time had passed, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, was looking out of the window, and he saw Isaac, that's Jacob's father, displaying affection for Rebekah, his wife. So it appears that Isaac and Rebekah had a warm relationship, a good marriage. Now, what else can we learn about Jacob? There's an interesting detail recorded in chapter 25 and verse 27. It says, as the boys got bigger, Esau, Jacob's brother, became a skilled hunter, a man in the field, but Jacob was a blameless man, dwelling in tents. So Jacob liked to dwell in tents. That might explain the strong bond that developed between Jacob and Joseph, who was his youngest for many years. Now, although Jacob liked to dwell in tents, he was by no means a sissy. He was a strong man, but he was a spiritual man. That's something for you young brothers to take away. You want to be strong, we know you do, but spirituality should come first. One time, spiritual Jacob gave his sons a beautiful lesson on how to settle a difference with a family member. We read about it at Genesis chapter 32, and I think all of us can learn from his example. We learn at Genesis 32 that Jacob's brother Esau was coming to see him. Now, they hadn't seen each other for 20 years. And to say that their parting had been difficult is an understatement. The fact is that when they separated more than 20 years earlier, Esau had vowed that one day he was going to kill his brother. Now he was coming to see him. Now, why was he so angry with Jacob? It's because Jacob had received a blessing from their father, and Esau was not happy. So Esau arrives, and 400 men are with him. Why 400 men? Well, the Bible doesn't say, but it could be that he was trying to show how important and prominent he had become. How did Jacob react? Did he try to go tit for tat? Did he try to show how important and prominent he had become with all of the blessings he'd received? Did he reopen old wounds? Did he argue with his brother? Did he say, you know, I was right all along and you, Esau, you have been wrong? Did he demand an apology? No. There was a lot that Jacob could have bragged about, no question about that. There was no doubt that Jacob had Jehovah's blessing. Early on, we read that an angel of Jehovah had appeared to him and said, I am Jehovah, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you are lying, to you I am going to give it, and to your offspring. I am with you, and I will safeguard you wherever you go. I will not leave you. Well, that's quite a blessing, isn't it? But there's more. For a portion of the previous night, that is, the night before Esau and Jacob met up, Jacob had wrestled with an angel, and as a result, he had managed to receive another blessing. But Jacob didn't flaunt his blessings. Instead, He humbled himself. In fact, he even bowed down 7 times before his brother, in front of his wives and his 11 sons. So Jacob settled any lingering difference with Esau, not with his fists, not with a bragging tongue, not with a weapon, but humbly, like a real man, like a real spiritual man.